So what are the top 10 best bosses in Soulsborne? Now, this topic is very controversial because bosses are arguably the most popular thing in the Souls games. And with Elden Ring, this franchise just blew up, so everyone has a very different list and very different opinion on what makes a boss great and who the best bosses are. But today, I'll be giving you my list about who I consider to be the top 10 greatest bosses in Souls. You can let me know your opinion. I'll try my best to give an explanation of why each placement is there. I'll try to explain why some bosses are not here, but at the end of the day, your opinion will vary from mine because you have different values, you like different things. So this list will be subjective. Please let me know what your favorite bosses are. I make these videos to start conversations, to have discussions. So if you're not commenting and just watching the video, it's pointless. So let me know who your favorites are, and let's get to the list. Number 10, I have Maria of the Clock Tower. Now, I will say, Maria is in conjunction with Gehrman. The reason I tend to value Maria just a little bit more on most days is because of her build-up. Maria arguably has a top 3 build-up in all of Souls for me. Going through the Clock Tower is just one of the most haunting experiences I've had. And keep in mind, the first time I went to the Clock Tower was a very hard area for me, so I was in there for a long time. I was exploring every part. And hearing the patient say Maria's name was just a very memorable moment for me. I always think about it when I'm going through it again. And finally reaching her and seeing her voice performance, seeing her cutscene, it's just a very haunting experience that really stuck with me. So her build-up is something that I often think about, even when I refight her. But let's talk about her moveset. So I wanted to start the discussion about Maria's moveset by saying her third phase is one of my favorite phases in the franchise. It just flows so well. It does a lot of damage. It's fun to dodge. It feels like a dance. That's the best way to put it. The whole fight feels like a dance, but the third phase takes it to the next level. Now, I will say something negative about Maria. Obviously, she's in my top 10 over like 150 other bosses. But I want to say some negatives so you know why she's not higher on the list. I wish her third phase started a little bit sooner. I think her first phase is a little bit too easy. Now, is that a bad thing? Absolutely not. I don't usually judge difficulty. But I just love her third phase so much that I wish I could fight her more. And the fact that I don't get to do that is a bit disappointing for me. It starts around 20%, 25%, I want to say, and usually the fight is over before you can experiment with it, which isn't really fun for me. So even though Maria is an amazing boss, one of the best ever, I do wish her third phase was a bit longer. Now on to the next placement. Number 9, I have Melenia, the Blade of Mikola. Obviously, I love her, but one thing is, I am curious to know what people think about Melenia today. Because I remember when Elden Ring first came out, people were very harsh on her. A lot of people didn't like her, especially because of Waterfall. And I think Waterfall could have been tweaked to be better, but I don't think it's a bad move, especially with the rest of Melenia's kit. If you look at the rest of her kit, it's very easy. Waterfall is the only move that makes her fight really challenging. I think the rest of her moves are very fun. They're very fun to dodge. Feels like a dance, but they're not very hard to dodge. Besides her soldier move in the second phase. That on Waterfall are the only 2 hard moves she really has. So I think once you learn to play around Melenia's kit, Waterfall really isn't a bad move. But anyways, enough about Waterfall. Let's start talking about her. Now, Melenia, just like Maria, has a lot of great build-up, especially in the promotional stuff. She was all over the promotion for Elden Ring. And she was actually the last boss I had to beat on my first Elden Ring playthrough. And everybody was hyping her up about how hard she would be. I was super excited to get to her. I thought she would be a pushover. And when I finally got to her, oh my god, that was one of my best experiences ever fighting a boss. I was up till 5 a.m. fighting her. Just a phenomenal experience. I will say, I was like most people at first. I didn't really like her. I thought some of her moves could be tweaked, that she was a bit too hard in some departments. But once I fought her more and more, I really started loving this fight. Now today, it's one of my favorite fights. I love experimenting with different builds of Melenia because she can be so challenging to fight with different builds. Her moveset is super fun to dodge. She's just one of my favorite fights ever. Like I said, I do acknowledge criticism with her. For example, I think Waterfall could have been tweaked, but especially in the second phase, I will say this, I think Waterfall is perfect for the first phase. I think it functions really well, but for the second phase, I don't really like the way it functions. But outside of that, I don't think it's a big enough flaw for me to drop her down my list because I love fighting her. She's one of the only bosses that I have never had a bad experience with fighting. So yeah, show me my number 9 spot. Number 8, I have Godfre. Now, I will admit, I do have a bit of a bias towards Godfre because I love doing no-hits. It's my favorite thing to do with bosses. And Godfre was actually the boss that got me into no-hits, so I really love him. He's one of the only bosses that I do no-hit every time, no matter the build. He's just one of the best bosses ever. And you hear me say this a lot, but he's built up super well. You get to see statues of him everywhere, paintings of him everywhere. You get to see him mentioned. You get to fight a golden version of him, which is like a teaser to the fight, basically. And when you finally get to him, you get to see this beautiful cutscene with him and Morgan, one of the most emotional cutscenes in Souls. And his moveset doesn't disappoint either. First phase, very flowy fight. I love fighting it. Dodging his spikes with jumping is one of the most satisfying moves to dodge, period. and then you hit the third phase. The third phase is super intense. I feel like he's gonna grab me and one-shot me at any time. It's super tense. One of the fights that always keeps me on my toes, and I love that feeling. I love when a fight still gets me excited even after like 20 times of fighting him. So he's an excellent boss, my number 8 spot, and I think he's perfect. I don't have any criticism with him. I just love him. Now, the next boss I have on my list is number 7 with Dark Eater Midir. Now, I'm not sure if this is a controversial take. I know people like Midir, but I don't think people have him in the top 10, top 5 range. But he has always been one of my favorite bosses. He was actually the boss on my first playthrough of Dark Souls 3 in 2017. I was stuck on him for days, and I loved the experience. And I don't know what it is, but he's a boss that I absolutely love fighting every single time. Even though he's a big dragon fight, the fight feels really personal. He feels like he's in your face. It's a constant back and forth, which just isn't a feeling other bosses create for me, especially dragon ones. That's why Bayle isn't on this list. Bayle is a spectacle, way more spectacle than Midir, but the fight doesn't feel as personal. I just love how Midir is constantly aggressive with his hands, with his mouth. He's just getting in your face constantly. And he's just my favorite dragon fight because of this. The fight feels like a one-on-one, even though he's a big dragon fight. And no other dragon fight has been able to capture that feeling for me. And that's why Midir is my absolute favorite dragon in the franchise. Now, Souls does have great dragon fights besides Midir. Like I said, Placidusax and Bayle are both amazing. They're great spectacles, and Bayle even has a great moveset. I'd say very complex, very visually pleasing. But they just don't compare to Midir for me, especially the feeling I described of him feeling like a true 1v1 with the rest don't really feel like that. And that's something that I'm really drawn to and I really enjoyed of the fight. Also, he's a fight, even though I've mastered his moveset in this clip, I'm literally no-hitting him. He always has me super excited, and that's because of his aggression, his moveset. I just can't stop praising this fight enough. Just one of my favorites ever. I understand that people don't like him because of his large health box or whatever, but his health box seems perfect to me, especially because of the stun towards the end that makes you basically be able to one-shot him after that. So I think he's basically a perfect fight to me. He's the perfect dragon fight, and I hope in the future we get another FromSoft fight that feels like a 1v1 like Midir. Number 6, I have Sword Saint Ishin. It might be a shock to you that he's this low on the list. I'm sure it's not a shock to anyone that he is on the list because everyone has him in their top 10. But the reason he's this low for me isn't a bad thing. I think he's a perfect fight. Like I said, everyone from 7 to 1 is perfect to me, so they're interchangeable. And I can see why someone has him higher, but for me, it's here. And that's not to discredit him. I think Ishin is a perfect fight, like I said. Now, one thing I really enjoy about him is how he utilizes every mechanic you have learned in Sekiro in his fight. So you have to basically perfect the combat to beat him. So that's a really fun part. Now, I will be honest, I don't have much to add about Ishin that hasn't been said before, since this fight is very talked about. Everyone loves it, and I'm obviously one of the people that loves it. So I just can't say much except I love the fight. I love how complex it is. I love how it keeps you on your toes. Great build up, great moveset, just no negatives about it. Overall great pack. The only thing is I wish the OST was a bit better, but that's it. Now we're on to the top 5, and at number 5 I have the Orphan of Cost. Now Orphan of Cost, man, I just love this fight. The best Bloodborne fight in my opinion. Now I've talked about build up a lot in this video, but no one that I have talked about so far even comes close to matching the build up that this man has had. All of Old Hunters is building up this fight. Even the base game is hyping him up. And it's just such a fantastic conclusion to Bloodborne and Old Hunters. The final cutscene is one of the best cutscenes I have ever seen. And Cost himself does not disappoint either. He is the most fun boss to parry in Bloodborne. And Bloodborne's parry mechanic is just one of the best mechanics in Souls. So the fact he utilized that so well is just a massive bonus point for him. He's everything I look for in a fight. He's aggressive. He's always fun to fight. Very beautiful arena. Very beautiful arena. Just a great story. Great moveset. Second phase is intense. And I just never get tired of fighting him, no matter how many times I fight him. And I believe he's a perfect fight. I basically have no complaints about him. Number 4, I have Promised Consort Radahn. Now, he's probably the most controversial one on this list. And he's the one on this list that I don't think is a perfect fight. I do think there's flaws with him, and I'll address them here. But I think he has more good in his fight that doesn't really bring him down for me, is the best way to put it. Now, the thing that moves Radahn this high for me is his moveset. I believe that Radahn has a top 3 most complex moveset in Souls. I think Radahn is the pinnacle that FromSoft is able to push the Souls gameplay without it being too much. I think if he was a little bit harder, he was a little bit faster, it just would have went way too much and Souls gameplay could not keep up with it. Now, I know when this DLC first came out, a lot of people didn't like Radahn. Listen, I get that. Like I mentioned earlier, I believe he's the maximum you can push a FromSoft boss with the classic Dark Souls formula until it feels like too much. So I understand what initial thoughts that people didn't like him. But recently, I've seen a lot more positive thoughts towards them. Could be for multiple reasons. One, they learned his move, and once you learn a boss's move, they obviously become easier and you start liking them more. Happened with Cost, happened with Midir, Freed, Melenia. All these guys were hated when they first came out, but these days they're pretty loved. Another thing is FromSoft did nerf him. Now, I know people complain about the nerfs, but this is the one time that I believe the nerfs were absolutely necessary. His cross slash attack was the one move that he had that I absolutely believe it broke the game. That should not have been in the game. It was almost undodgeable unless you had perfect positioning or you just got super lucky. I just don't think a boss should have a move that relies on that much positioning or RNG. But outside of that, I believe these days his moveset is perfect. Now, I will address some criticism. I don't really like him in terms of like story and thematical standpoint. I think the final cutscene with Mikola is a good cutscene, but it's not a good final cutscene. Like, it's not satisfying at all, especially when comparing it to the conclusion of Old Hunters of Orphan of Cost. I think it's very weak. Now, obviously, Radagon is higher because I think his moveset is better, his OST is better, just the overall fight is better, but in terms of lore and story, I like Orphan of Cost more. So Radagon's a boss, even though I love him, he's very high on my list, in my top 5. I understand if people don't like him because he does have some noticeable flaws. Number 3, I have Mesmer the Impaler. Now, I'll be honest, when Mesmer was first shown, I didn't think he'd be the best boss in Shadow of the Edtree. I was like, there's no way FromSoft would show off their best boss at the very beginning. But I can admit, I was wrong. Mesmer is an excellent fight, perfect. He was my top 1 at some point. When I first fought him after Shadow of the Edtree, he was my favorite boss ever. He's still a contender for my favorite boss. Like I said, these top 3 are all perfect. They excel in everything they do, and I would not criticize a single thing about them. I love everything about them. Now, Mesmer is the perfect example of how to balance a boss. He's aggressive, he has a lot of moveset, but he never feels unfair. He never feels like too much. Even though he has some of the most moves out of any boss, Mesmer never feels like too much. The whole time you're fighting him, he feels completely fair. Now, there has already been a lot of conversation on Mesmer's moveset, so I don't want to get that too much. But one thing I want to mention briefly before we move on to the next placement is Mesmer's story and lore. I feel so bad for this guy, man. Like, he's the character I feel the most bad for in Souls besides Morga. And the reason for that is the amazing voice performance by the voice actor. Like, Mesmer's voice acting really sent a chill down my spine when I first heard it. I really feel bad for him, especially after learning his story. I also believe that Mesmer has probably the 2 best cutscenes in the Souls franchise. And those cutscenes mixed with the amazing voice acting really make you connect with him once you know his story. Even without knowing his story, the first time I saw the cutscenes, I knew there would be something tragic going on. So that amazing voice acting performance, the beautiful moveset, and everything makes Mesmer one of the best bosses in the franchise. And I will never forget my first time experience of fighting him. Whenever I load up Elden Ring, the first thing I think about is my amazing experience with Mesmer. Number 2, I have Slave Knight Gail. And listen, you might be sitting here thinking, why is Gail number 2 and not number 1 like most people's list? And listen, like I said, I think the top 3 are all perfect. Gail used to be my favorite boss for 3 years, but recently my number 2 went over him. But Gail is still an amazing boss. I completely understand why most people have him at number 1. I think he's the best in a lot of categories. For example, I think he has the best phase in the franchise with his 3rd phase. That is the perfect example of how to do cinema and great moveset. His fight has spectacle, and he has a great moveset. And that's hard to find these days. Sometimes you trade out spectacle for a great moveset or vice versa. But Gail nails both perfectly. The OST that plays, the arena, the lightning bolts, his aggression all make his 3rd phase absolute perfection and my favorite phase in all of Souls. Even his 1st and 2nd phase are also amazing, but I don't think they're the best like his 3rd phase is. Now, everything about Gail is amazing. His OST, his arena, his story. I'm sure you've heard praise from him 100 times. I'm not going to rehash things you've heard over and over again. Let's move on to the final placement. Number 1, I have Soul of Cinder. Now, before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to tell you a funny story. Soul of Cinder has been the hardest no-hit I have ever done. And Soul of Cinder isn't really a hard boss, so why is the no-hit so hard? It's because he has so many damn moves that I had to memorize all of them. And for a no-hit, you have to be perfect. You can't just one-shot a boss or anything, because that would make it not fun. So I had to memorize every single move he had, and that was, oh my god, it was painful, but it was also amazing. That's honestly what made him my favorite boss fight, and that's what made me appreciate him a lot. Now, there's a common complaint surrounding Soul of Cinder that he's too easy, but I personally don't really judge difficulty. Of course, I don't want a boss to be incredibly easy that I one-shot them, But difficulty doesn't matter to me. What matters to me most is like how fun I have with the moveset, how hype I get while fighting them, just everything else. And Soul of Cinder is a boss that even though he doesn't have a lot of health, I get so hyped whenever I fight him. The OST, the arena, the build up, his design. He has my favorite design. I think it looks super cool. So that for that reason, like I never get bored fighting him. I never think he's too easy, especially because I usually do challenge runs when I fight him. And since he has the most moves in all of Souls, if you're doing a challenge and you have to learn every single move, he's definitely one of the tougher fights. So I just love everything about him. Like I said, I think he has the best moveset in Souls on average. He has one of the best arenas, best OST. Like I don't know how to describe it. When I first heard Soul of Cinder's OST, even when I hear it now, I don't want to say I get emotional, but I feel something in my chest, which is a feeling that no other OST has ever created. So he has a special place in my heart for that reason too. And that's why he is my favorite boss. I just consider everything about him perfect, and he's my favorite in most categories when it comes to boss fights. And that's my list. Here's the final look at my top 10. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I post these videos to have conversations, start discussions. So if you have any thoughts about my list, if you want to tell me your list, please comment down below. I'll respond to everyone. And thank you to everyone that fully watched the video. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe.